It's a pleasure to be at the Sully Forum. I thank Dr. Baham and Mac and AUIS for the invitation. I think we always find the Sully Forum the most hospitable and the most interesting, as the last panel amply demonstrated. We have the honor and the privilege of a discussion with the former Prime Minister Hayder Abadi, who was in office from September 2014 to October 2018. Speaking with young people last week in Baghdad, I think he's fondly remembered as a prime minister who achieved an awful lot in very, very difficult situations, both economic and political. So my first question, and I would very much recommend his book, Impossible Victory, which is required reading for all of us, I think. My first question, Mr. Prime Minister, is what advice do you give to Prime Minister Sudani? What are the big lessons that you learnt during your time in power?
Well, thank you, Toby, and I thanks everybody here. Mr. Barham Saleh, who is a friend, more than an ex-president, and for everybody who organized this meeting. I think my advice is, of course, not to indulge in details, but not to oversee them. Details sometimes are very important. You can make a lot of change and a lot of progress by amending the details. I've seen through the budget, you can plan from the top, but if you don't account for the details, we have in Iraq something like 3,500 accounts in the country. And if each one of those, you allow the details to go highway, not controlled, the expenditure will multiply. So what we have done, we have to look into these details. And this is my advice. You have to be very careful because sometimes you cut budgets, but what do you cut? You may plan it from the top in a very good spirit to improve the budget, to cut the wastage of the budget, but those who implement it will cut the important parts and will leave the others, which are corruption, tilted, or otherwise. So you have to be very careful here. You have to go into the details in this matter. I will liken it to a building. I mean, you may have very good architect who make a good building, but what good of a building if the details of the foundations not be looked at? It will collapse later on. Okay, so this is my advice. When I was an engineer in the first year, I was told, you have to do things by your own hands. If you don't, when you become engineers, laborers will laugh at you because you don't know the details. They will say, you, sir, we'll do it that way, and that's the right way. But since you've done it in your own hand, you know this is not right. You know you can tell from your instinct that this is not right, and you can tell the right person. So this is my advice. Don't indulge in details because you don't have time for that.
Well, you very accurately identified the main problems that the current Prime Minister faces, and essentially one of them is corruption. So could you explain to us how you tried to deal with corruption during your own premiership and what success you had?
Well, the success is in 4 years you cannot see it much because we had war, we have many priorities. To be honest with you, I didn't want to wreck the boat. It's too dangerous. Daesh was still around Baghdad. Baghdad was under threat. And if you rock the boat too much, it may collapse. But I did start procedures, which are the right procedures, by simplifying the procedure for the government. This is very important because corruption hides behind a very complicated procedures and routines and paperwork and bureaucracy of the state. You have to simplify it to make it very clear to the citizens. This, of course, is a plan which will take years to implement. It cannot do it in 4 years. In my opinion, it can take between 12 to 16 years to implement such a plan so it will become a foundation of the country. So I think this is number one, to simplify the procedures so that corruption will not prevail. At the moment, corruption is hiding behind bureaucracy, and people don't know their rights, so they have to pay a bribe to speed things up. I think this is a danger. It's a disease. Even prime ministers sometimes cannot do anything about it. I mean, you are not in a job as a prime minister to find, oh, this is a corrupt person, put him in prison. That's back to dictatorship. What you do, you can tell things and you ask your institutions to do something to hand him over to the courts, and it's up to the courts. I don't know whether the judges have the insight, whether they have the right procedures to have more investigation. Is very difficult and tough. So this is my advice. I'll just tell you one thing about this theft of the century. When I first heard it in the news, I looked at it every time I look at social media, I didn't believe it. I said, oh, this is not possible. How can somebody take so much cash? It's a huge amount of, well, if it is a fiddle, it's possible. But taking cash out of a bank with that amount, unbelievable. Later on, next day, I believed it was true. Okay, but this will bring a lot of eyebrows. How could that have happened? Under our own sight. We have parliamentarians, 229 of them. We have so many ministers. We have so many institutions. How did it go unchecked? I think we have to look into that in details. I'm sure the Prime Minister, and he says that he's looking at it. The judiciary has a role in this, major role. I think we can uncover a lot of this. For me, is not, you shouldn't direct your fingers on persons. It's a phenomenon rather than persons. You remove this person, another 10 people will come forward to take his place. So that's not a solution.
So you've identified, I think, very powerfully the structural drivers of corruption. And I think we remember your premiership well and those mass demonstrations in 2015, a forerunner of Tishreen in October 2019. Now, you pushed through reform through Parliament. So again, what lessons did you learn from handling the demonstrations in 2015? And what lessons would you give to Prime Minister Soudani about the young people and their unfulfilled aspirations?
Number one, to listen. I'm not saying listen to everything. You have to differentiate between things. But you have to listen. Every morning, I receive a list of how many demonstrators in every place. So many people in Diwaniyah. What was their demands? They will list their demands. What do they want? Another one in Nasiriyah, and so on. I will look at it and study it. Some of it, I cannot do anything about it. We don't have enough money. All prices plunged down. I cannot increase salaries. I cannot employ people in public sector, not only, but only those who the state really need to function. But at other things I will look. First, that's number one. Number two, to encourage people to air their grievances. That's my way of doing it. If you don't encourage people, if you force them to go underground, they will resort to other means. That's what happened in October 2019. It's very dangerous. You have to encourage people to air their demand, to say what they want. Then they don't resort to other means, unlawful means, because if you do, I mean, Saddam Hussein at times, he was executing people for saying something, for issuing a leaflet. Then we will say, well, why shouldn't I carry arms? If I get executed for saying a word, I might as well carry arm, and it's worth it if I get executed. So it's the same thing. That's number two. Number three, to start honestly doing things when you promise people. Don't promise people to quieten them when you cannot do it. Be frank with them. I remember once I received delegation from Wasat, and they asked me for more water. He says, the governor, and they're preventing us from operating our machines to get more water. And they said, well, we are not harming anybody. I told them, but you are harming people in Amara. You are harming people in Basra. Amount of water is limited. When you take more water than you deserve, other citizens in other governments in the south will be harmed. So you have to be frank. You don't tell them, okay, I'll do something, but then you cannot do it, or you'll be unjust to others. Number four, you have to be responsible for all citizens. My objections to some of the decisions, not for this government, is still very new, but for the previous government, is that you only answer people who reach you. What about people who don't reach you? People who come to the gates of the green zone. They are usually close to you, maybe influential. But what about people in the rural areas who cannot reach you, who don't have even the money to get transported to you? You are responsible for the whole people, even those people who don't like you, who are not like you. Then I think this is very important. When you take a decision, take all these people in your own mind. It's easy for me, a delegation I receive. They want increases, they want appointments. For a prime minister, it's very easy to do it. But when you do it, keep in mind what's about the rest of the people who are similar to those. Then you will be very unfair if you give these people what they want, but those people who are far away, it will be more unjust and it will lead to revolt. People can be quiet if you can't do it, but you are fair. But when they see you, oh, you can do it for some, but when you are not doing it to them, when they are in the same position, when they are in the same need, they are with the same qualifications, but you appoint this, you don't appoint the other, or the other with the less qualification and then you appoint them, people will revolt. So this is very important.
Now, you were a wartime prime minister, a successful one. You rebuilt the armed forces while you were fighting the Islamic State. What is your view today of the current security services? What do you think needs to be done? What has been done well?
Don't push the armed forces commanders to seek the support of political parties. You should stand with them. They should receive the proper training, the proper arms which they need. You should take care of them, and they should be independent. If I have a military wing or people who are in favor in the military, then he will not defend the country, he will defend me. He will defend my party. The poor citizen will see this. He will see these are armed groups, armed institutions who are not defending the country. This is very dangerous. That's why we tilted all of this. I mean, if you remember in Nainawa and Al-Anbar, people were calling the army all names, okay? But this army being transformed. It was called National Army. I remember I want to move some units from one place to another in Mosul. People called me, no, we want the army. We love the army. I mean, this didn't happen just for nothing. The army has changed its behavior, the way they deal with the people, the way they look at the people. When you transform the army into different groups, if you treat one commander differently from the other, you have to be very careful. You have to put a plan for military commanders, for other fighters. And in my situation, I even went to the length. We have restaurants in the army, and usually, forgive me for this, we have this hierarchy. There is one for officers and one for other fighters. I say, okay, I know the difference between commanders and fighters. Those issue commanders and the others should obey. But I can't understand why the officers will need different food than fighters. They are human beings. They all need the same treatment, the same food, the same attention. Why we separate them? I mean, this has been brought from before, in actual fact, which I'm very much against it. I remember when I first went to the university in Manchester, I was surprised to see the professor sitting with somebody who's working in the laboratory. They are equal during the break time, they call it tea time, okay? 2 tea times in a day. They are equal, but during the work, they are different. This has different responsibility than the other. I think this is human. In my opinion, this is Islam, okay? This is Islamic values, where the Prophet was sitting among his people. Nobody can differentiate who he is. He's sitting anywhere. He didn't have a special place for that. This is true Islam, but unfortunately, I think we moved away from it.
Now, bringing you back to current politics, you're a member of the coordination framework. You've just criticized armed groups. There are armed groups within the coordination framework. I wonder what keeps you together, what unites the coordination framework, and if that unity will continue going forward.
Well, there are different reasons for every one of us, to be honest with you. For me, it's better to keep a dialogue than not, because keeping a dialogue can prevent catastrophes. I mean, the framework really is not a coalition. Is not, there is nothing written. We don't have even a system of voting. We have agreed that, well, let us sit and discuss. Each one will hear the opinion of the other, and this can enlighten us. Why should I be against you and you are against me when we're not listening to each other? So this is the thing. But the challenge came in 2021 when there were grievances about the elections, and there was a fear. I'm not against the Sadrs at all. I'm not against any coalitions, including Sadrs, probably the KDP or the other parties. But there was a fear that the few will control the whole country and will push the others to the outside. This is very dangerous in Iraq. We haven't built an institutional democracy yet. Our institutions are not that powerful. They're still very weak. And when you do that, you can change a lot of things in the country. I've heard from a lot of friends in Europe. Some of them, they have coalition governments, but they cannot change everything. They cannot change the employment because they have very rigid and powerful institutions which will prevent them from doing this. So I think this is one of the reasons who brought everybody together to prevent that. But I'm saying that we should be inclusive. I still say we should be inclusive. Within that, I mean, some are talking about majority government, minority government. I say we should be inclusive. In Iraq, you cannot go along as just one side. For one reason, in the West, you have a national parties. Here, unfortunately, we still not move forward. I did try, and I did have some success, but it needs time for it to have a foundation. And I hope and I wish we'll move to more nationalist policy and politics. In that case, then we can move to a majority.
I'm afraid we have to stop now because we are at 11 o'clock, we have to move on. So I would like to thank you for your eloquence, as usual, but also for your honesty. And can you leave the audience with one thought? What are the major regrets of your time in office?
I'm not calling it regret, but I didn't get it. There was calls on me to do almost a revolution, okay, with reforms. I did do reforms, but there were limits because I have to abide by the Constitution. I have to abide by the laws. I did ask the citizens who were demonstrating, well, look, there is a way forward in that. If you really want it, I call on you to go into the streets in your millions. Then I can call that like a voting. But they didn't, only a few thousands, and I didn't get it. That was one of the requests, which I could have reformed the whole system, but I wasn't given that chance. Yes, they told me to do it, but I can't go outside the framework of me. The other issue is that Iraq was written off before, many times. In the 90s, it was written off. It has no light at the end of the tunnel. After the occupation of Kuwait, there were sanctions, very unfair sanctions, criminal sanctions. So Iraq was lost almost. In 2003, there was a new dawn. There was expectation. People were expecting. There was hope. But with Al-Qaeda, we lost that. Everybody was talking Iraq is divided, sectarian war, we should leave Iraq. But Iraq came out of that again. During Daesh, we lost Iraq again. Iraq was end of Iraq, everybody said. Iraq will never come back. But we are back. And then now, I think we can. But it's not incidental. It's not accidental. If we are going to go back and be better than before, we have to work hard. We have to do something about it. That's why I tell my friends in political parties, we should do something about it. You don't leave it. It will not amend itself by itself.
And that's a wonderful note to end. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.